Welcome to VentureCrushFG. Good to see everyone back here. I'm Meredith Bouchon. I'm a partner in our ECVC group, joined by my partner Ed Zimmerman and our panelists, who we'll introduce you to in a moment, but some housekeeping, some announcements. We are on Zoom as well as in person today. There is a QR code up there. If you are in the room, there's a chat on the Zoom you can participate in. Scan that, but if you're in the room, don't join the audio because it'll mess us up a little bit. What do you do in the Zoom chat in addition to chatting? You can drop questions for today's panelists. Those will be fed up here. You can also introduce yourself to each other on that. So we do encourage joining that. So you've heard about our panelists today. Erica is here. We do have one change in the program. Kim Seymour was unable to make it. She had a family medical issue. So we're really pleased to be joined by Dr. Sheena Iyengar, the St. Lee Professor of Business at Columbia. She's a world-leading expert on choice and decision-making and the best-selling author of a book, The Art of Choosing. She won the Financial Times and Goldman Sachs Business Book of the Year Award, so I think she'll have really great insights for us. She also runs a course at Columbia Business School called Think Bigger, and Erica has participated in that as a judge as well. She created a 6-step method for teaching people how to take advantage of lessons learned from neurological and cognitive science to put our minds to work when generating bigger ideas. So hopefully after today, we'll all be thinking bigger. And there are articles about both of our panelists in the Zoom chat. We're very grateful for our team today that helped put the event to get together. Lauren Russell and Wally Fatai for all the research help, and our events team, Jenny, Ginny, Angela, Karen, Owen, Ariel, Christina, Emerson, Britt, Elsie, and Carrie. Thank you. We couldn't do this without you. Our next VentureCrushFG event, the last event for this year actually, sorry, it won't be this year, but it's the last event for our 2024 pods, will occur in early 2025, February 6th, with Elise Colleen. She's the founding GP of Stillmark in Los Angeles. And we're going to be talking that time about developing your brand in PR, and that's for both your company and yourself. So there should be a registration in the chat. And is Leah in the room? Also wanted to announce that we have been joined by another amazing partner, Leah Galasso, in our ECVC group. She's a New York-based ECVC lawyer for over a dozen years, serving startups and venture funds. She's the third new partner to join our group in the last 5 months. In addition to Leah, we welcome John Horton to our Palo Alto office and Abe Kwan in New York. So in the Zoom, you can see all the press releases, but it's been exciting for pretty much each event this fall to get to announce one of these new partners. So you should be able to meet Leah after this as well. She's here today in person. And with that, we can jump into today's conversation. Mm-hmm. So Ed and I always take turns pairing with our teams to research our panelists and ask some questions and give background. And I got to do some work on you today, Erica, which was fun. We were up here last week with your partner, Monique. And Erica, let me pull out my research notes, is a founding partner of Rain Ventures. She is a New Yorker, a mathlete, as Ed calls her, from the world of finance, and she's paired with Monique, who is not from the world of finance, but the world of music. Rain, you've been investing together, I think, over 10 years, but you closed your first fund in 2021, and it's the top 5% performing fund of that vintage. Investing in seed and Series A in tech mostly, but not always. And you previously founded 1000 Angels. You were at Dream It Ventures, Star Angel Network, Golden Seeds. So with all of that background, with the success of Rain, I'd love to hear a little bit from you about partnering with Monique, with someone from a completely different background and building something so successful.
Yeah, thank you. That's such a great question, Meredith. And I just want to say hello to everybody and let you all know how grateful I am to be able to be here with you guys. Love the VentureCrushFG program, so I'm sure I'm going to meet some fantastic folks. When it comes to the idea that we're going to be talking a little bit tonight, which is, building a team, building culture, one of the things that's really interesting is that as someone who started a VC firm, that's also an area that we have to focus on, right? We have to build our own teams, and it's just as challenging, if not more challenging for us, because when we form a GP partnership, right? And most investors like to invest in not, multiple GP firms. That partnership is pretty much, expected to be stronger than even a marriage, right? There's no like, oh, we're replacing this person. You've really got to stick it out together. So when I decided that I wanted to start a venture capital firm, I had to be really thoughtful around who I wanted to bring in as a potential GP partner. And one of the first things that I thought about is, well, I know what my strengths are, but is there somebody out there who is extremely complementary to maybe some of my weaknesses or, areas where I don't know as much? And although I went to Columbia Business School, I worked on Wall Street for 8 years. By the time Monique and I met, I think I had been doing early stage venture investing for about 6 years. So I knew a lot of people who were kind of like me, thought like me, had a similar finance background. But when I met somebody who had really such a completely 180 degree, almost opposite perspective on things, but in a really smart way, a lot of operating experience and a real focus on how to help our founders, develop their strategic thinking, big picture vision, and really looking at the upside. I knew that it would be a great complement, and we luckily started investing together and found that there was a really good fit because, I would say we both have really good perspectives, but when you overlay those two perspectives, it results in some really excellent decision making, and I think that's why we've had good performance.
Can I ask Erica a little bit about culture and pricing? Do you ever look back and have remorse about a clear instance of price gouging in your personal history? When you were 10 years old, isn't it the case that you were massively overcharging for friendship bracelets?
I mean, they were $1. Have you ever made a friendship bracelet?
Yeah,
I'm talking about the ones where you tie the string for So I think it was actually a great deal, but there was a good profit margin.
How do you sleep at night? No. So you started entrepreneurship really at a young age because
5th grade, I was president of the Young Entrepreneurs Club. Yeah.
Wow, amazing.
And you graduated from high school at 16?
Indeed, I did.
And so, given your very academic background and all of the math you did on Wall Street, why startups where at the level at which you're investing, there kind of is no math?
Okay, so I actually have a really good explanation for that.
We'll see. We'll find out.
Yeah, so so I got my first VC job in 2006. So it was quite a while ago. And I was fresh off of, 8 years on Wall Street where there was a lot of math involved. And it was really interesting because somebody, really smart had hired me. I was working as executive director of Golden Seeds, which is, all of the members there were people who had very successful careers. And it was kind of funny because in, one of our first set of companies that pitched, she submitted her financial model and they did their pitch, and all of these, sort of amazing, older executive women with way more experience were like, oh, this is fantastic. And I caught the bust in the model and I was like, oh, look, according to this, it says you'll have double the revenue that you really should have. And everyone was amazed. They were like, oh my God, how did you find that? You're right. We were going to underwrite this whole deal, based on them getting to 200 million in revenue. And, even in their best assumptions, only 100. So, the math does matter sometimes. And it was actually really interesting to me because I kind of did realize, wow, this is an area of finance where there aren't a lot of people who are really sort of paying attention to the detail of the numbers. And so that kind of became my way of breaking into venture, because I realized, there weren't a lot of folks, especially, definitely back then in the field, like a lot of them were operators or people more on the technical side, who really kind of understood the capitalization strategy and, sort of the math behind it all. And particularly with such a level of kind of interest in it that they were willing to sit down with the founders and be like, hey, let's work on this together so that you understand it, right? And you know how to underwrite the growth of your company. So that's how it happened. But you're right. We don't have to think too hard about like differential equations and stuff.
I'm sorry. So switching to Sheena for a moment. Sheena, you have written you've written books. You've won all these amazing awards. And you've been teaching at Columbia Business School for years.
Since 1998.
During some portion of that
But
period.
I'm still 16.
And at 16, you were...
She just graduated high school.
So your academic background is actually a little bit different in that you were going to school but not to learn when you were in elementary school. Can you talk a little bit about how you got from that background to early admissions at Wharton, where you did your undergrad?
So you could say in some ways that, my parents took me to school when I was 5, and then I basically never left school.
Okay.
Right, so I went, but when you were saying that I had a non-traditional schooling, you mean what happened to me when I was a kid?
Yeah, and you've talked about, for background, we've known each other for years. Sheena was my
I know
boss.
his life story, he knows my life story, but I have forgotten what parts of my story he refers to.
When you went to school in New York,
Yes.
The teachers weren't particularly interested in teaching you.
Okay, yes, that is true. So my parents moved here when I was 3. I was born in Toronto. And when I was 3, I was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa, which is a rare form of retinitis pigmentosa, which actually led me to go blind much earlier than most people who have RP go. Most people who have RP usually go blind in their 40s, 50s, 60s. But I was told I was going to go blind during my school years. And, this was New York. Classrooms are really big, so 40, 50 students. And so when my mom took me to school, they didn't really want a blind kid in the school because that was going to impose a huge burden on the teacher. And so I was supposed to go to a school for the blind, but my mom didn't like that idea. And so she decided I wasn't blind, and that therefore she sort of, I don't know how she exactly managed it, but she sort of convinced the school to let me be there in name, nominally, but that she would do most of my education. And so it's true, I used to kind of go to school, sit in the back, but I wouldn't really learn much. And then my mom would try to teach me whatever she could figure out, but she was an immigrant. So she did a really good job of teaching me math, but history, English, it was pretty bad. And so when my parents moved, when I think I was 10 years old, my parents moved to New Jersey. And when they moved to New Jersey, the rules about how they handled the blind was very different. Now, by this point, I couldn't read print anymore. And so, because my vision was gradually decreasing. And so by the time I was 10, I go to school, and now there they didn't have schools for the blind. What they would do is that the child had to be in the normal classroom, and you would have some sort of a special ed person that would come like once or twice a week. And so the special ed person decided that I was woefully underskilled. I didn't know how to read Braille, didn't know how to type, didn't know all the basic things. And then they did all these battery of tests. And so I often joke to Ed, because the first time they did an IQ test, I was like 69. So they really thought I had some sort of a learning disability.
And that's
but
why
we-
you're teaching at Columbia, not Harvard?
Yeah.
Exactly. And so they really, because, my mom had taught me math, but she didn't teach me much else. So I didn't even have general knowledge. And so I really would answer a lot of questions wrong. So that's really when I started to kind of officially go to school, was 5th grade, 6th grade, and I generally struggled. But by the time I was in high school, we sort of figured it out. So that is my story of school.
And how did you decide to become an expert in choosing and choice?
So I decided to become, so I only officially decided when I was a PhD student, but I think I was thinking about choice ever since I could remember, right? Because as you can see, my story is one that was always fraught with the question of what choices I would have. So here I am growing up in Flushing, Queens. I'm going blind, and I live in 2 different worlds. So at home, I'm the daughter of Sikhs, who are very traditional Sikhs, and at school, I'm the blind kid. And so there were always questions, no matter where I was. Could she read? Could she write? Could she learn how to do math? Is she gonna, would she have friends? How is she gonna get around? The questions always seemed endless. And I was always annoyed by that. I felt like I hated, in fact, I still do, I hate the words, "it's not possible." And I know that phrase in almost every language. And the worst is like "shagata ganai," which seemed to come out every 5 seconds when I was in Japan. But I think for me, I was forever trying to figure out, no, they're wrong. It is possible. And so I think I was always thinking about choice in different ways as it related to me trying to create choice for myself. And so I would say, A, as a blind person, I was thinking about choice, and then B, as an Indian American, you're constantly going back and forth between 2 different cultures that have very different views about choice, right? So in American culture, we take it for granted to say things like, well, I'm going to do whatever I want. Yeah, of course you're going to do whatever you want. This is a quote, free country. Whereas in Indian culture, like the best way I could punish my mom was to say, Mom, just do whatever you want, okay? That was the perfect way to punish my mom. And I only officially studied that question, though, when I was a PhD student. But I was practicing it starting at like 7 or 8.
My last question for you before I hand it back to Meredith is, you gave an interview some years ago in which you said that each day you start out thinking, there are 3 to 5 things that are my priorities for today, and anything else I accomplish or do today is icing on the cake.
Yes.
And the example that you gave was priority number 1 for today is keep 14-year-old son alive.
Yes.
And which seems like you're setting a relatively low bar, although I myself had a 14-year-old son. I did keep him alive, but I had a 14-year-old son. It's not that low a bar. So the question is, number 1, do you still do that? And number 2, what are your 3 to 5 priorities for this very day?
Oh, for today?
Yeah.
Oh, geez, he's giving me a test. Well, first of all, clearly you had a much better son than I did.
I've met your son, I'm not sure.
Okay. Now, I adore my son. I do not wake up every day now worrying about his survival rates, only because I don't see him every day. And so he's probably even more likely to kill himself every day. But he's 19 and in college, so, thankfully he keeps me blissfully unaware. But I will guarantee you on the day that I do see him, I am back to worrying about, oh my God, what is he up to? Yeah, I do think that I would say the biggest change that's happened in our lives as individuals and as a society is the fact that we are experiencing a choice tsunami. And that choice tsunami really started to form in the 70s, but has really seriously boiled over in the last 25 years. And it's not just that we have a lot of choices every day, a lot of information coming at us, but as we all know, we don't know what's true, what's false, what's relevant, what's irrelevant, etc. The list goes on. And so one of my big, I guess, sort of pieces of advice to myself is to be choosy about choosing. And that it's really, because, making every choice takes a lot of effort. You don't want to do it. You want to do a lot of choices on autopilot, which basically means when you set that autopilot, it better be a good heuristic. But you really don't want to have to actively think about every single choice, because that's going to make you crazy. And so, so be choosy about choosing. The way that manifests itself is I will ask myself, what are the 3 to 5 things that I must do this morning? In fact, the first thing I do is make a list. Now, unfortunately, I will sheepishly confess that I still try to do that every single day. But in addition to my other roles, I recently became an entrepreneur. And now I understand why it's so difficult to limit myself to 5 choices per day. It's more like 5 choices per hour. But I promise you this morning, one of my 5 choices was to come to here.
Thank God.
We appreciate that very much.
Well, I did not choose the gender of my children, but I'm feeling really good about having a 14-year-old daughter right now. Living her life. It's like priority 3. So we had a really great discussion with the FG Pod before this, which I appreciate so many of you participating in. And one of the topics we talked about was, to what extent does an entrepreneur choose culture or set culture versus create an environment for culture? I'd love to hear how you think about that and how they can do that well, whether it's creating an environment or actually making a choice.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to be on sort of the topic of choice, certainly, no choice is a choice. So, you're either actively thinking about building a culture or you're ignoring it. And that's also a choice too, and a risk. We assign a lot of value, I think, to founders who are building their teams really carefully and with an eye to appreciate how much value is retained when you build a company with a sense of culture, when you actually invest in the resources that are needed to sort of keep your culture intact. And more importantly, even just as a founder, to take the time to consciously set that vision. As Sheena said, when you are a startup entrepreneur, you might be dealing with 5 choices an hour, you might be dealing with 50 choices an hour, and this is one that very often tends to drop to the bottom of the list of priorities. So companies who've actually, set it as a priority, we tend to think have better outcomes, and that's one thing that we actually do as VCs. When we lead a seed round for a company and we take a board seat, we act as the folks who, come to the founders, make them sort of pick their heads up from their work and focus on these questions. How are we building the team? How are we building the team with diversity? How are we building the team with diversity of skills? And how are we really thinking about, as we add new members, making sure that we're retaining a culture that we think is most beneficial to the success of the firm?
So I am an academic, so do you mind if I tell a study?
Yeah, I love studies.
There's a very famous study that was actually done in Silicon Valley, which tracked, I can't remember the exact number, but if anyone's interested, you should email me. But I think it was over 1,000 different startups over the course of 20 years in Silicon Valley. It was a Stanford study. And what they did was they took these startups and they bucketed them into 5 different sort of startup cultures, you could call them, like autocracy, meaning one person at the top making all the decisions, like bureaucracies, organized purely by task. But the most powerful one was the commitment one. And the commitment one was where you had all the members of the startup where they really had cohesion, had commonality of values, they were really committed to the product and whatever they were developing. And they were the ones that were the most likely to get an IPO, they survived the longest. So generally, all of the sort of things that we judge startups on. It was the commitment culture that did the best, at least for startups. Now, as they grow beyond startups and get bought, then it turns out that they actually have to transition to more of a bureaucracy to ultimately survive beyond that. So what I would say, something we do at the Columbia Business School with large companies, and I actually did it with my startup as well, is having a values discussion. So it's important that when you create your team, that you have people that have common values, right? And you decide what those common values are going to be. And in my case, it was very important that everybody be very collaborative, that they be dedicated to the idea of always going for quality and never settling for mediocrity. That was a core value. But you decide what those values are, but you have to have that discussion so everybody's on the same page about values. And then when you're picking people, you're obviously picking people that you like and you get along with and you respect, sort of like a romantic partner. But you're also picking people that can obviously wear different hats and have different skill sets because it's too lean, you don't want redundancy. And now you have an opportunity for there to be conflict, right? Because maybe the person doing the numbers, may not always appreciate the person that, wants to, take their time and maybe not as efficient. And so they may have disagreements about where money should be spent or where time should be spent, et cetera. And so what becomes really important, at least in my experience, is the ability to listen. Listening doesn't mean that we try to compromise and come up with, whatever everybody can kind of live with. That goes for mediocrity. Listening means that I listen to everybody's perspective as to why they're saying what they're saying, and then making the decision that's in line with what your goals are and being able to explain to everybody so that they all understand why we picked what we did. Anyway, that's my thoughts on culture.
How do you tell whether something is a commitment culture versus autocracy? Because sometimes the autocrat doesn't know they're an autocrat. Sometimes they do, and it's like totally intentional, but.
Yeah. So, if every single member of the team, independent of the presence of the other members of the team, can all describe, maybe not every single detail, but are all saying similar things independent of one another and are seeing the same goals and vision, they probably have a collaborative culture.
So I'd like to think so much about how do you build that collaborative culture, right? How do you recruit for it? And then how do you enhance it within your ranks? How do you keep it going? And then, of course, have to get to the flip side of when you have to say goodbye to people.
Yeah.
But I guess let's start with recruiting, right? It's hard to find the right people who are going to match with the startup, who have to maybe pivot their skill set, wear more hats than they're used to wearing. Do you have a perspective on the right approach there? And then we can take it to the next piece.
Yeah, so, we invest in companies, at seed and are extremely hands-on basically through Series A. And that's sort of exactly the time in a company's life where, they're going from, all right, we've sort of validated what we're doing. Now it's like we've got to recruit a team, that can be attractive to be a, well-funded Series A company. So this is a lot of what we think about and what we do. And it's a really tricky time in a company's life, right? I would say, if you're building a sales team, maybe like 50% of your hires are actually going to work out. Every time you hire somebody, there's really a lot of risk. So you've got to figure out how to make decisions quickly, how to evaluate people really quickly, and how to be okay with cutting your losses. A good friend of mine Judah Taub just published an amazing book called How to Move Up When the Only Way is Down. And it's about the local maximum problem, right? Which is that, if you have a range of outcomes in a function, you could end up kind of at the top here, but you don't know there's actually a much higher part of the function that's maybe a little bit down. But to get there, you have to go down. And when you're building a team, that's like a problem that you're facing consistently, right? Like you might have someone leading, a specific department, whether it's sales or product or whatever, and they're just doing okay, but you feel like there could probably be somebody better. Do you keep them and sort of stay at your little local maximum, or do you fire them and replace them and take another risk looking for that higher mountain? So definitely it's a huge area of risk mitigation for the companies that we invest in, and something that is probably one of the most challenging tasks that a founder has to do as they're going from kind of being the person who's responsible for everything in the business, right? The dishwasher, CEO, secretary, to, all right, now I've got to try and optimize as well as I can, not only for skill set and talent within this team that I'm building, but also at the same time thinking about culturally, am I building, I'm maybe bringing together really good parts, but am I creating a whole that's also, cohesive and harmonious?
Well, I think that was very well said.
Oh, thanks, Sheena.
Now you're just trying to be collaborative.
I don't have anything more to add to what Erica just said. In general, when you see entrepreneurial teams, right, whatever team you start with, they're going to shift multiple times. You never quite know who's going to be around at different points because there's going to be so many transitions. So it's very important at every step of the way to be transparent. You don't need people bad-mouthing you. You don't need people feeling that they were treated unfairly. At the same time, you need to be able to make the important decisions that have to be made at different stages so that you can keep growing.
You kind of can't avoid having some people at some point, especially when you get to scale, feel that they've been treated inequitably, unfairly by the company, by the founder, by the leadership team. You can do some damage control. You can put in place some cultural protections to make sure that other people feel that the outcome was equitable. What kinds of things have you seen or do you advise as you are working with companies or guiding leaders to create a context in their company or a culture in their company where a decision that might look or feel inequitable can be judged more generously in a broader context, right? Because we don't see situations where a company gets to 100 people and no one has been fired.
As much as possible, you try to get them. I've never been in charge of a 100-person company, but I have seen big companies, and I would say as much as possible, if they can understand right from the beginning that, everything is always transitional, and you never know when you might have to leave. So as much as possible, to the extent that they can be given opportunities for finding training opportunities, career development opportunities, encouraged to network. These are all ways in which they can still feel that at least they managed to get something out of it. What do you normally do?
Normally do about what?
About the problem of people are going to feel that something was unfair.
People think everything's unfair. So, there's very little, I don't know. Like for us, everything is very, very case by case. I would say one of the most interesting, things that I've learned in the couple of years that, we've been running the fund and, having more of like a board seat type role in companies, is that, it's very interesting how challenging it is to get people to really consciously think about including women as they're building teams. and how actually like somewhat difficult that is to execute, and how that's an issue that's I think, given what's happened this week, we're getting a lot more information on why is that the case, and what are some things that we can all do to push forward and change that.
Yeah, and that was something that we discussed earlier in the room as well. And I know a lot of startup founders are struggling to find the women, want to hire women, and are struggling to find the talented women. And I think there's a lot of room for growth, but I love hearing that people are focused on it. Certainly more should be. From your perspective, evaluating companies for investment, are there red flags that you see?
Yeah.
That you
Oh my
say,
God, there's so many fun red flags. Here's the thing that's like really funny about the job and makes it interesting yet challenging is that honestly, like to start a company, you have to be a little bit crazy. So, like off the bat, the folks that we're working with are going to be crazy in some way. We just have to figure out like how are they crazy? Like which part of them, is. So the number of red flags abounds. Whether the company is not doing well, it's very traumatic and triggering for founders. If the company is doing 100 times better than you expected, that's also traumatic and triggering for a founder to deal with. So, there are just a lot of things, that we constantly have to keep an eye out for. And particularly, I think Ed mentioned a little bit about, the sort of autocrat dictator type founder. There are a lot of, folks who seem really talented and seem like they're going to be able to recruit a great team because they can really articulate the vision, but then, they want to remain in charge of their little fiefdom and, are not interested in sort of bringing on people that could potentially challenge them, right? So that's, one thing that we really look out for and we really try to work on. I think the most important thing that we're hoping to see in founders, and this is again tricky, is somebody who can really appreciate others and treat them with respect under every circumstances. And the reason there can sometimes be a little bit conflict there is that you have to have a lot of self-confidence and even sometimes some arrogance, right, to go out, raise money, think that you can start a business. So we've got a lot of kind of counterbalancing forces that we have to work with, right? People have to have drive, they have to have a little bit of chutzpah, but at the same time, we also need to make sure that, they're operating with humility and grace and inclusion, and sort of getting that exactly right is, part of the fun.
So what's the craziest attribute you've ever seen of an entrepreneur?
The craziest what?
Attribute.
Oh, attribute?
Because you said they're all crazy. So what's the craziest crazy?
I don't know. I mean, we've had people where, you could build your company and the culture is a little too fun, and then, certain things are happening, right? Or, you are a person who, is wanting to control everything and, sort of very manipulative. There are some founders, and thank God we haven't had any in our portfolio, but, I've seen founders who just straight up lie and, are not honest about results, or really hide things from people. Sort of, I don't want to get into too many like personally identifying information on anything, but oh my gosh, like the range of, difficult outcomes is unlimited. And we've had situations where people wanted to sort of be the leader, but wanted everybody else to do everything. So you're always going to get kind of a different flavor. Like I guess they say all unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. It's the same thing. All of these kind of red flags and difficult circumstances, it's always, you're always dealing with kind of like a new aspect of the human psychology that you've probably never seen before.
I want to go back to your comment about the difficulty in recruiting women.
Yeah.
And I want to push a little further. In the conversation that we had before this with the companies that are in the current program, where it's a founder-only session and nothing leaves that room with attribution, which doesn't mean nothing leaves that room. One of the companies, it's a women-led company. They had a problem recruiting women dev folks, right? Women software developers, engineers. And a board member said, let's solve one problem at a time, find men instead.
Right.
And that is a culture pause point moment.
Yeah.
There are questions about how you push back on your board member. And in venture-backed startups, your board member is typically your cash, your investor, right?
Yeah.
And
So
this
you have to
company,
be picky around who you choose, as your investor.
They weren't
But-
fortunate enough to choose you.
Yeah.
Because I hope you didn't say that, folks.
No.
Okay.
Well, I mean, that's the whole thing. Honestly, I think our founders, when we're like, hey, you've just hired 5 men in a row, can you hire a woman? They're like, oh my God, why are they bothering me with this? So I suppose it goes both ways. But, certainly, to me, it feels like one of those problems where, it can snowball really quickly, right? And so that's why, we think the work that we do, kind of coming in with this approach and prioritizing it when the company is still very early can help us build better, stronger companies, without having to kind of like go back and fix things, right? Because once you sort of go too far in one direction where you're kind of getting within certain maybe more insular networks, or you're really leaving people out, it's now becoming a less attractive place for a woman to join, right? Like, I remember, during my career on Wall Street, I almost exclusively worked for, in situations where there were no women, right? So my last Wall Street job as a mortgage-backed security trader, I was the only female trader on the entire debt capital markets team, right? So our entire trading floor, I was the only woman. There was one woman salesperson. So imagine, a huge trading floor. There was one female trader, one female salesperson. That's it, out of probably like a couple hundred people, and not a lot of women want to enter that atmosphere, believe it or not. So that's kind of the thing, is that like, the worse you let it get, the harder it's going to be to reverse. And I think that's where we have the problem, is people have already kind of, not been bothered, and then they create environments where women don't feel welcome, and we need to fix that.
Thank you for elaborating on that point. Sheena, what are you doing to help leaders, or how should leaders think about making those choices? And one of the things that is said in the startup context is like it's easier to turn a small boat around once you've gotten to 500 or more people, or whatever, choose your number. It's really hard to renovate culture in that way. So what are you advising?
So I can honestly say that I've never seen a strategy that's really worked.
It's a depressing week already, right? Like,
right,
this is not
so-
why you're here. We don't need this
All right,
bullshit.
let me first say the depressing part, and then I'll give you
That
I hope.
wasn't the depressing part?
And then I'll give you maybe, I don't know, a silver lining, or at least for me, a silver lining. Okay. So at Columbia, and I think this is probably not private, so I guess I could share this. There's been several times where we've done the thing where we will only interview women, or we will give a gift to every division so it won't count towards your normal hiring lines. So you must hire a minority, and you can then get a freebie, essentially. And that has been ways in which we have expanded the pool of women leaders, and then minorities that are hired. And it's not like we're particularly unique. These are things that a number of organizations have done. Certainly you see corporate boards have had quotas, or you must have women, et cetera. It is true that the data shows that when you do add diversity on boards, it does depending, they can't do it across all companies in terms of the statistical analysis, but where they can, they actually have seen that it increases the revenues and the shareholder value for the companies that have increased diversity. And so, there's clearly some potential benefits. Maybe it's not as widespread as we want it to be, but it's tough. I've never seen anything consistently work, and it's absolutely the case that, 1 year you'll have the whole number of women or minorities hired, and then it swings back, and then it's, like right now, I would say in my dean's office, it's all white men. Now, so I don't really know. I don't have a good answer for you as to how to do this in a way that's quote unquote right. In my case, I'll tell you something funny about me, is I am blind, and I don't always know what somebody is, particularly nowadays because people all speak the same, right? So I won't know the color of someone's skin. I won't know their ethnicity. I mean, they could be a Chinese American, sound like white, right? I don't know. And sometimes I even can't always tell the difference between a guy and a gal. That's embarrassing to admit, but it's true. Okay? And so I actually, in some ways, have found that to be, I suppose, positive. It can be embarrassing. So right now, I have a startup. I'd never thought about I honestly can tell you, I never sat down and said, what will be the gender composition? What will be the ethnic composition? I literally went by someone's skills, someone's dedication, who was going to be committed. That was really what I care about. And by happenstance, I have I suppose, a very dark woman, who I actually only recently found out she was dark, as my lead. I have a Taiwanese, who's my operating officer, a woman. I have a Brazilian woman, who's the CFO. I have a strategy officer, who's a gay guy, who apparently has red hair. And then I have a software engineer who's apparently a very skinny, short, wiry Jewish guy. And this just happened.
So you're one of the few people we've ever had speak at Venture Crush who can get away with the "I don't see color" line.
Yeah.
And I think, that's cool.
That is cool.
That's cool.
I can tell you I have been embarrassed many times because I didn't know that somebody's identity.
Yeah, I really don't know where we go from there.
Well, I'll add from personal experience. I wish more people couldn't see color or gender, but most people can. And so while I am a champion of ensuring that our teams are diverse, I think it's also really important to give praise and credit, not just because of that. Because nothing drives me crazier than when people say, Meredith is the best female lawyer. Like, no, I'm the best lawyer. I happen to be female. And I think that can be a cultural point too, is respecting and celebrating diversity on the team, while also just respecting that you're great at what you do. Did you think about that at all?
I mean, yeah, I don't know that anyone's ever said like, "Oh, you're the best woman." Blah. I agree. I wouldn't want to hear that. So, I do think that that's really important. I think one of the most important things that what we are thinking about when we are, particularly when we're focusing on making sure that there's like a decent gender balance, is that everyone says, "Oh, I don't want to see color. I don't want to see gender," but the truth is like, we're all bringing kind of like different energies to a situation, and there is so much power and value in feminine energy, and what we can add to a team, and how we change the way decisions are being made, and how our very presence can sometimes elevate people. So I actually recognize that and value it. And, that's part of why we think it's important, right? It's not about, sort of neutralizing everybody, but realizing, that we're all sort of bringing different, really valuable intangibles to the table. And, we don't want to leave any of those out.
And often they won't say, Erica, that you're the best female VC, but it might arise that they are comparing you to other VCs, and those other VCs in the same sentence with you are women or are women of color. And
Right.
Meredith, would you live with the best M&A lawyer? Because best lawyer is just so many categories.
Covers everything.
But it so often is couched that way. So but I agree, you want to bring diversity onto the team because it does change the team dynamic. And we see it in the boardroom all the time, the difference in a boardroom where you have people to check the discussion and bring it in different directions.
So,
Go ahead.
So no, go ahead.
I was going to pivot, but we can stay on this.
Pivot.
I was going to pivot too. So now we have the team, and hopefully the team is not all one the same. Bringing that team together, and we spent a lot of time in the pod discussion talking about doing that when we're not all in the same place. A lot of VCs a lot of startups are partially remote or fully remote or have dev teams overseas. Any thoughts on bringing remote teams together? I know it's been a big topic in the last few years.
And how you build culture or propagate culture while you're remote like that.
Yeah, I mean that's a big issue for us, and we don't have a great answer right now. I think on the one hand, we've been encouraging our portfolio companies, please build your team, locally, have people together, have them in the office. But then, I look at our team, and our team is all over the country, right? And I'm like, well, that's fine for us. We need those people. So, I think it's very tricky because there's, really sort of a tension between, all right, there's so much value, particularly if you have sales process, to having people, sort of in the same room, right? So, I've been at companies where it's all right, the sales team and management and the developers were all in one giant WeWork office, and it was just so easy to communicate things really quickly. And, the developers could sort of understand better what I needed in the product because they were sort of hearing me talk all day and getting much more familiar with what we were actually doing. So, there are so many benefits to being together, but people just, they don't want to do it right now, right? Because we've kind of gotten used to the flexibility of being able to work from home, work remotely, work from, low cost of living areas. And, not only is there clearly, everyone knows there's pushback from employees around needing to come to the office, but even for us, our CEOs, are trying to do kind of some salary arbitrage, right? So if, we have a founder that's in New York or in Seattle, they want to be able to hire a person, that's in Minneapolis or, somewhere else where, they feel like they can get the person for a lot cheaper. So we're still kind of dealing with, what are the outcomes. I think in the short term, it's maybe not so bad. It can be, our CEOs who've chosen to go the mostly remote path have invested in doing, team offsites on a fairly regular basis to get people together. I still think it's not necessarily enough, but where I think the trade-off is between sort of the short-term happiness of the employees and possible, optimization of salary expense is going to have a long-term consequence that younger people are not getting to start their careers in environments where they're exposed to sort of the intellectual capital and social capital that just rubs off on you from being in the office. And in the short term, that might be sustainable, but in the long term, I think it's going to be a little bit strange when we're expecting people to sort of mature into roles, but they've been, Zooming in with their colleagues, a couple times a week and not really, having the opportunity to kind of be immersed in the business that they're in.
So when the world shut down in 2020, as you know, we had a miracle, which was that this country produced 3 vaccines in record time. And I had the opportunity to interview the guy that was in charge of the vaccine development at Pfizer. And, if you think about it, it's a huge company. They have employees, they're all shut down, right? So very few employees can go in. They have to save the world. They have hundreds and hundreds of employees that they are managing and coordinating with across this country, abroad. Remember, they're having to manage all the different trials before it can actually, there's lots of different phases to developing this, and they have to do it fast. And the one part of his whole description that really stuck out for me was that every morning and every night they had a set time when all the leaders from across the world had to get on this Zoom, and it would last for 30 minutes. And what they did was it was just a check-in, and they would start by saying, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And then they would get into what each person had learned or done that needed to be either tackled that day or had been done that day, that had learned that day, and now needed to be tackled the next day.
You've talked, Sheena, about not thinking that brainstorming sessions, multi-person brainstorming sessions, have real value. Am I correctly attributing this statement or sentiment to you? And what do you prefer or propose that startups and founders do instead?
So if you think about a brainstorm, well, first off, how many people here regularly use brainstorming? Raise your hands. Ed,
Well, wait.
You're going to tell me what percent.
No, but instead of raising hands, shouldn't they clap?
All right, fine. Clap your hands if you've used a brainstorm. All right, did it work? Yeah? Did you get a great idea? All right, so brainstorming, by the way, was invented right here in 1938 in New York City.
It's not just thinking. What's the difference?
Well, okay, thinking, that's a good one. That's the flash of insight. So there are, at the moment, I would say, 3 prevailing methods for ideation, right? The first is called flash of insight, the aha moment, whatever you want to call it. It's what you get when you're in the shower, you're going on a bike ride or on a jog, you're taking a nap, you're driving, etc. The flash of insight, it comes to you unexpectedly. Essentially, we daydream about 4 hours a day. About 20% of those ideas might work out. Okay, now, brainstorming was invented here in 1938 by BBDO. We all know the 5 rules. What are the 5 rules of brainstorming?
Do not know them.
Defer judgment.
We don't know these rules.
Build on the ideas of others. Encourage wild ideas. Go for quantity, right? These all sound familiar, right? So you're basically just supposed to huddle and just, start engaging in whatever thoughts you have. It's great for quick decision making. It's great for coordination. It's great for feeling good and creating consensus. It's bad for diversity of ideas. It creates its own little echo chamber, because if the first person says dog, the next person says cat, the third person says fish, because they're trying to be creative. But nobody would say shoe, right? Because the first person essentially creates the benchmark, and then everybody's head goes to that place and they start iterating on that. So it's a great bias-making machine. And so what I say, but it's actually based on studies, is even if you get people to just spend the first 5 minutes thinking first by themselves, jotting down their ideas by themselves, they will double, as a team, you will double the quantity of ideas But much more importantly than that, you will increase the diversity and quality of ideas, because now, if that person's thinking about shoes, they're going to have some ideas about shoes. And that person's thinking about dogs, they'll have an idea about dogs, etc. And so that's the sort of pros and cons of brainstorming. The third, of course, is ChatGPT, but I'll shut up before I.
Well, so first of all, I know that my dogs are always thinking about shoes, especially my wife's and mine. So you also have spoken about the person who orders first at your table in a restaurant gets the meal.
Boy, he
which
really
they are,
studied all my. Oh my goodness. Okay.
It's almost like I find so much value in the things that you say, right? Like it's actually,
I mean, he remembered my childhood. Wow.
I live vicariously. But for the first person who orders in a restaurant, they're happiest with their meal, and it sort of dictates how other people. It's the same. I'm just trying to actually put this stuff together in my own.
Wait, why are they happiest with their meal?
Ask the professor.
Professor Iyengar?
Just call me Sheena. So think about it. You go to a restaurant and they come around and ask you, what do you want to eat? I want to eat the filet mignon. And then the next person, then they go around to the next person. And that person was thinking about the filet mignon, but should they actually order the same thing as the first person? Well, sure. I can be the second person. Then you get to the third person. They're also thinking about the filet mignon, but they don't want to look like a copycat, so they order the salmon. Right? And so you go on and on and on. And so essentially, the only person who got to order without having to consider what everybody else was ordering was the first person. And so they're usually the happiest.
Interesting.
Providing it's done the way they like it.
Yeah, and that's a public, choice-making situation. But we haven't had a good number of studies on this, but my suspicion is, particularly when you look at the elections, is that even when we're voting privately, it's not obvious to me how much we pay attention solely to what we ourselves might want. I think we're still influenced by what others might think of what we chose, even if those others might never know.
That's deep.
Yeah, I'm editing myself right now, which is unusual. So Erica, you gave an interview a while ago, and you said that if I've already been thinking of what your company does, I'm not interested.
Probably not interested,
And,
yeah.
okay.
Not
100%. Shrooms is something we could talk about.
Okay.
But is that still true? And how early in the morning do we have to wake up to come up with some company idea that is novel and fascinating enough to make it through your lens?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing: is that I heard recently that the highest vibrational emotion is not actually love; it's authenticity. And one thing I can say is, for founders who truly have authenticity, they're usually able to quite easily think of ideas that meet that bar. And what I mean by that is that, we tend to find that criteria is met with people who are starting a company to solve a problem that they really understand and that they have a very unique perspective on, and they're uniquely qualified to execute. So, for example, speaking of the shrooms, right? So, as Ed knows, one of our most successful portfolio companies is an adaptogen mushroom-infused coffee company called Rise Superfoods. So, sorry guys, it's functional mushrooms. It's not psychedelics. I apologize, but it still is really fantastic. And when we were going to hear the pitch from the founder, my partner and I, we had made a couple investments in consumer companies, and they're very tricky. It's very tricky to know, are people going to love this or not, right? And in fact, we had been pitched by some of the other mushroom coffee companies before. I think 2 of them had actually pitched to us, and we had passed on both. And I wasn't particularly interested in investing in this person's company, but it had been a warm intro from another VC that had just co-invested in a deal we led. So we're like, okay, we're going to take the call with this guy, and just to be polite, and but we're probably not going to invest. My partner's like, yeah, you're right, we're probably not. The thing that was so interesting there that he saw that was so simple but people weren't thinking about is that the functional mushroom sort of infused food / coffee market, had existed and it was growing. But the thing that was so different and out of the box about the thinking is that he understood, hey, all these other brands, which are growing pretty decently, like I think, at the time his competitors were maybe at like 20 million in annual revenue or something like that, not shabby, but not massive companies. He realized all of the other brands out there were marketing to kind of like the Burning Man biohacking crowd, right? The coastal elites that are actually doing the psychedelic mushrooms. They were trying to sell them functional mushroom infused coffee. His insight was that, no, this should be for like the soccer mom in, Michigan, right? This should be for the guy who's on a long haul truck drive. Like, we're going to actually just market this as a very mainstream product to a very mainstream customer. And the reason that he had that insight is he had actually come from the coffee industry. He had been running the Maxwell House brand at Heinz Craft for a couple years. Still a very young guy, like 25 years old, when he kind of decided, to leave. He had actually pitched the idea to the folks at Heinz, and they said, "No, we're not interested." As they say, huge mistake, big mistake. But, decided to quit his job, move into his mom's basement, and sort of execute on this. And so, that's a great example, because what was not so unexpected wasn't what he was doing, it was how he was doing it. And that very small, like, change in perspective, allowed him in less than a couple of years to build the largest brand in the space that's like actually absolutely decimated everybody else that's out there. So I hope that's an interesting anecdote.
It's a great story.
I'm a little disappointed that we're not all going to start tripping on our coffee, but it's a good story.
You can add some, regular mushrooms to your
it's good. We're good. I'm not a Burning Man.
Can I ask you a follow-up question?
Please.
How do you define authenticity?
I think there are some people who start businesses because they went to business school and, they brainstormed in a class and they were like, here's an opportunity, but they don't know, shit about what they're actually trying to do. They just see, a white space. And for us, authenticity in founders are when like that founder really understands the problem, and gets it better than anybody else. So for us, that's one of the first things that we're looking for, and we tend to define it as like founder market fit. But really, you have to be coming, I think, from a very authentic place to be able to make the kind of sacrifices that are required to build a really successful company. Like, you have to really care and know.
Are we doing audience questions?
I mean,
Yeah.
It sounds like you want to do one. So let's do one from you, and then we'll see how we feel about the rest.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ed. I'm Toby. I'm the founder and CEO of Dental Find. We're a marketplace that enables people to shop for dental care online. So think purchasing, cleanings, whitening, and upfront pricing. So my question is for you, Erica, with regards to something you mentioned in the beginning of the panel about the difficulty in hiring women, and how events that transpired this week made that clearer as to why. And so maybe I'm a noob and I'm like living under a rock. I'm not sure what exactly, and maybe, I don't know if you're referring to the election. Can you share
Yeah,
more
that's
about
what
that
I was
reason?
referring to.
Oh, okay.
I mean, yeah, I was referring to the election just from the perspective that, yeah, I mean, I think, it's difficult for a woman, and I mean, I'm not like an extremely political person, but, it does feel like, wow, here's a woman who's like super qualified and, has done all the things and achieved all the whatevers. And, she still is somehow rejected, and how, I don't know, wild guess. I feel like if it was a man with the same, qualities, we'd be in a very different position. And, it's just, it's a tough thing to accept. And, I think that there's a tremendous amount, we as a society, and really as a planet have a lot of work to do in terms of, being willing to, submit to the leadership of women. And, I think if we can get there, we're going to have a much better place, but we're not there. And, even, it's been a long time since, I've kind of been in, the corporate world where, women are a minority. But even back then when I was, in that space, not every firm is progressive and amazing like Lowenstein. There are a lot of firms where, it's like, okay, well, we can have the one woman, and then, okay, women, like fight over the scraps. And, sometimes as women, we get distracted and end up doing that. So yeah, it's still hard. Like, I don't think anyone can disagree. And, I know a lot of people who are within institutions, who have been willing to, admit, oh yeah, like, can't believe they hired a woman, to do this high level role. Like, oh, that's so annoying. I mean, people still very much, secretly feel this way. So let's work on it, ladies.
What would you say is a potential solution?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, I think, I don't know. I think there's a big responsibility on men to perhaps do some inner work. And I think there's also a big responsibility on women, to go above and beyond to try and support one another, right? Like, I don't think we really have an option besides that. And, we maybe have to be a lot more cognizant about it. I think we only have control over ourselves. So that's a place where we can start to invest. And, we certainly hope that more men are going to come along. I know lots of really fantastic male, allies and people who have, done the work to sort of understand this. But, the truth is, I'd say probably 90% of the population is really kind of like oblivious to this area, where we're kind of like shooting ourselves in the foot. I mean, it's 50% of the population. I mean, if you look at educational institutions, women are rising to the top. There's so much potential there. And yet, we're kind of wasting it because we've got some sort of ingrained societal thinking that's actually like really counterproductive. But it seems like we're only digging as a country, digging our heels in a little bit deeper. So we'll see.
I really appreciate and value you saying that, and I will freeload and +1 everything you just said, personally, not on behalf of any organization with which I may be affiliated, but personally, very much so.
I'd like to add, though, that I think we need more men like Ed in the world.
Yeah. Hear, hear.
I appreciate that comment about Ed and other allies, but I also think that idea, this is a systemic problem, and so when we have these isolated changes, like when you were talking about the hiring at universities, and this is happening at many universities and it not working, it's because this is a societal problem that I actually think, rather than being individually something that we need to tackle on ourselves, that it's detrimental to men as much to women to be in this culture. It's actually hurtful to all of us. And that point where you're like, is it hard to accept? I was like, I don't want to accept it. I would actually like to fight against it. And I grew up in an industry that I'm now a founder for, where I was one only woman, similar to kind of like what you said, but in a very different context. And I had to go through it all. The
constant, does your husband know you're here? Is this gonna happen? All the kind of stuff, sexual harassment. And I thought that when I got to my 40s, like I was done with that. And then I decided to become a tech founder, female tech founder. And I've been told when you're talking about looking for devs or looking for people in the company, I've been told I was looking for a female CTO, and I found one. She's like, well, first off, you're a woman. It's going to be really hard for you to get funded. You need a male CTO. And these are the kind of things I get. And I was at another kind of event like this, and I was talking about how difficult, like 2% goes to female founders, and they were like, put some more men on your team. That was their answer. It was like, let's make dominant culture comfortable so that you can succeed. And it is really hard as a founder because you're hungry, right? Like we need this in order to succeed, to constantly press against these, glass brick ceilings. But I do think that we can all together work towards changing those systemic issues by thinking of it as a system and figuring out the ways in which that system can change together.
I mean, I love that. And, I have a great idea for everybody, which is I would love for everybody in this room to, make a little commitment. And, if you're willing to do so, like, please raise your hand. But I would love if everyone could commit to doing something to support or uplift one woman in their life this week. So just one.
You can clap too.
Okay. All right. I'm clapping. Sorry. Raise hand. All right, cool. We got most of the folks. There were a few holdouts, but not going to get everyone.
So,
all right, you committed. You can't get out of it now.
Erica, can you talk a little bit about, there is this interesting aspect on which you're evaluating founders when they are trying to raise money from you.
Right.
You and your co-founder / partner in the fund are also evaluated when you are raising money. And part of what is evaluated is the dynamic between the two of you and the culture that you build as a firm yourselves.
Yeah.
So it's like this cycle. And can you talk a little bit about that and how relatable you think that is for founders?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. It's probably one of the biggest challenges we have. So when Monique and I, started our first fund, it was just a 2 GP fund. We had sort of a couple, venture partners that were just sort of helping us with deal sourcing, but they're not, full-time or anything. We had a couple board partners. And so, our initial LPs really had to kind of go off of just us, right? And, would we be able to, number one, build a high-performing portfolio and hopefully, return their money times at least 3, right? But number 2, would we be able to build a firm franchise and, create future funds and actually attract talent? And, that's, I think, something that's really hard to project. I mean, I think one of, the things that was beneficial for us when we were first starting is, just kind of how different our skill sets were and complementary. So even between sort of 2 people, we were able to cover a pretty wide variety of things that need to be covered, during the due diligence and underwriting process. And as well, a lot of people think about VCs as like, oh, it's about selecting deals, but like selecting deals is, just one small component. After you make an investment, you're gonna, spend anywhere from like 5 to 10 years working really closely with the founders to help them achieve their goals. So, is this something, can you guys do that all? And then I think for us even, I was kind of like, oh, great, we can do the work. Let's, first sort of show returns. But as, we decided to go to market with our fund 2 and expand the team for our second fund, we're able to add 3 operating partners who are literally just like 3 really stellar, amazing, talented people. And you're like, oh, wow, you actually want to like join what we're doing? Like, it's such a, it's an amazing thing. And I think, it's like the ability to not only kind of perform on your vision, but to get other people who you think are, maybe even smarter and more talented than you are. Hopefully that's what you're adding to your team to come on board. It's really like something that we've been really grateful to have. And we think, we know our LPs and potential LPs, are kind of looking to see, okay, as the team grows, how is the culture retained? Sort of what's for us our geographic coverage, right, of different sectors where different startups are in different areas, but also the different sort of skill sets and perspectives that are coming to the table. So yeah, we go through it too.
And there's a context shift as well. Can you talk a little bit about some of the artists that Monique, in her prior life, worked with?
Yeah, sure. So I know Chris Cornell was definitely like a big one that she worked with. She worked with, I don't know why I'm blanking on, there's like another really great, she's worked with like some of the best artists in the world, right? So definitely their label, worked with Shakira, worked with Justin Timberlake, many other folks. I apologize that I don't have all of these names at hand. These are very, very famous people. I just my brain has been inserted with other things. But one of the things that's so interesting about, working with Monique is that sort of the transition to managing founders from running a record label was pretty easy because like a record label is basically like a VC firm for artists, right? And so one of the reasons why, I think we've been really successful and our founders have had a good experience is that when a record label is developing and managing artists, they take a much more personal approach, right? Because these artists are like creatives, they need to be nurtured, they need to be supported. And so we're one of the very few firms where we do the same thing, but very much from a perspective of like, recognizing the founder's talent and like nurturing them in the same way, that she sort of had the experience doing before. So
just from my perspective as someone who evaluated the fund and met the two of you when you were starting to raise Fund 1, seeing that you had a record of many years of co-investing together as angel investors, you both had experience doing that separately as well, and seeing that analogy, I wonder, like we thought this is a great team and they have relatable experience and they know what it's like to lose money together,
yeah,
which seems like a really valuable thing, really valuable attribute for people starting a fund, because it's not fun to lose. I don't know if you know this. It's not fun to lose money together. I've been losing money with some of the same people for 18, 19 years now as my co-investors. And that's like how you know it works. It's okay.
Yeah.
We also do make some money. But I'm wondering why people, and maybe this is a Sheena question more than an Erica question, but why people might have difficulty, because part of my thesis was if her company hadn't been a record label that worked with like Nelly Furtado and like all these amazing, like high-end people, if it had been a much less successful
I just
software
remembered
company.
the name of the best, what I think is the best band, One Republic. Too Late to Apologize, guys. That's a banger. Okay, that was her.
If it had been a much less successful software company, people would have been like, well, of course, right? And Sheena, do you think that we block, like we can't context shift, we can't analogize? That's part of our decisioning problem. And then maybe you can talk a little bit about your decisioning company.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you're saying, why do we not normally have the culmination of Erica and her partner?
Well, why would people not, people might have an easier time saying this person ran a software company that was much less successful. That's easily translatable, as opposed to the analogy that Erica made to how you pick and nurture artists at a record label and invest in them the same way that you do with a venture fund and founders. And that seemed like, to us,
A big
as
leap.
we evaluated, it seemed so
A big
obvious.
leap.
Yeah, yeah. So we do have a way, and part of this is our educational training, right? That we learn about a particular area. You know, if you're a lawyer, you learn about a lot of law. If you're a doctor, you learn about a lot of doctor. If you're a fashion industry, you learn a lot about fashion. And so when you have a problem, or when you're trying to grow and expand in any way, you generally look within your industry. That's what we're trained to do. But to Erica's point, actually where you see real innovation, and you can pretty much take any disruptive innovation from any point in history, and when you see that innovation, what you'll discover is they combined pieces, right? And when they combined pieces, what they really did was they did the analogizing, where they said, well, who else would do something similar, but that isn't in the expected place, and the expected place is always my industry. But so they were in a totally different industry, doing something totally different, and yet there was an analogy between what that other industry was doing that is applicable to my industry. And voila, you make a combination and you have a disruptive innovation. Let's say one example of this, like for example, Netflix, right? People here probably remember the days of Blockbuster, right? You had Blockbuster in pretty much every few blocks. Whereas Blockbuster now, well, it's gone. What would have been within industry innovation? Hollywood video, right? So what was Blockbuster doing? You would have to go to the store, rent a movie, and you'd have to pay late fees if you returned the movie late. So usually they gave you 2 days. What was bad about that model? Well, I didn't want to move my butt to go to the store, find the store. They didn't always even have the movie I wanted. And if I didn't remember to return it, then I would have to pay a late fee. On the other side, the store had to make sure that it had all the movies that could potentially be wanted. So if you just stuck to within industry and you made things just a bit better, you'd create Hollywood video. Always made sure you had new releases and you gave people a week. By the way, they also went out of business. Okay? Then you had Redbox. Anyone know here Redbox? Okay? And so what's Redbox? Well, they said, well, okay, let's make the walking distance, or the getting around distance a little more convenient. I'm not going to have as big an inventory, but you know what? I've made it really convenient. So Redbox is basically taking the soda pop machine and now putting a video cassette in there, so you can rent your movie at the same time as you buy some popcorn and soda pop, right? And that was certainly innovative. It went into the Coca-Cola business, but it didn't solve all the problems. I still had to pay, the late fees, and they didn't have all the movies I wanted. So what does Reed Hastings do? He says, well, I don't want to have to get off my couch to get my movie. Who else sells something that's a leisure activity, that's a non-perishable, and I don't have to get off the couch? Oh, and by the way, while you're at it, I want an infinite supply. Okay, give me infinite inventory. So who in the 1990s had something like that? You guys know the answer to that, right? Who was it? Amazon, who sold books. Remember, they started with just books. Okay, so he analogizes from books to movies. Now, he says, okay, we'll mail people their movies, and thankfully DVDs had been invented. That's, of course, gone now, too. But at the time, DVD made it possible to mail you a movie, right? But does he want to sell movies like he sells books? Do people want as many bookshelves filled with movies? Probably not. So he now needs a different financial model as opposed to selling and as opposed to late fees. And he says, okay, well, what other industry has a leisure activity that, you kind of do it whenever you feel like it, but you never quite know how often or you're going to do it, but it's a leisure activity, and they have a different financial model than either selling or renting. Gym membership. Planet Fitness was his model there. Today we take it for granted, but back then, the idea that you could do it as little or as much as you wanted in a month, that was revolutionary. So he takes these strategies from books and from gym membership and literally disrupts the home entertainment market. So what I just described to you is actually the core of what I've been teaching, which is think bigger. It's the methodology that Ed referred to earlier. I teach people how to literally do out-of-the-box thinking. And, there's no rocket science to out-of-the-box thinking. I'm literally just saying, look, let's go look at other boxes and see what's in those boxes and what we can strategically copy. I don't want to say steal because, I'll get in trouble. But what we can strategically copy and import into my world. And the new startup that I created actually has a generative AI software that makes it faster and easier for you to actually find these out-of-the-box strategies.
One thing too that I think is so amazing about that story and the mark of a truly fantastic founder is that they were willing to disrupt their own business with streaming before anybody else did.
Yes.
So
He kept disrupting.
That is even more impressive than starting the first, successful business.
Let's just hope he keeps disrupting, because right now he's a little shaky. In fact, the entire home entertainment industry is a bit shaky. They really do have a serious too much choice, completely disorganized information problem. It's way too difficult to watch a movie at home right now.
It's ripe to disrupt. All right. Erica, Sheena, thank you so much for joining us today. Sheena, at the very last minute.
Thank you.